Good afternoon, all, or fairly good afternoon, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for AIM's Trade Talk. Is it only about supply chains? I'm Kristin Rupert, Senior Vice President for External Affairs at AIM, and I'm also Executive Director of the AIM International Business Council. Supply chains are still in the news, and we will talk about supply chain challenges and solutions today. However, other issues such as inflation, the war in Ukraine, rising prices for raw materials and other commodities, higher borrowing costs, labor shortages, skyrocketing transportation costs, and a possible recession are all affecting U.S. manufacturers and service providers. We'll hear more about some of those challenges in today's session. Before we jump into our discussion, just a few housekeeping items. We will not be doing a live Q&A during this webinar. However, if you have questions that you would like to ask us, please submit those online in the question pane. And those of you who are watching on your laptops or something, you'll see on the left, there's a little photo of what the screen looks like. So I'll tell you how to get to the window where you would type your questions and your comments. And then finally, if you're having any technical issues, please contact my colleague, Catherine O'Reilly, and she is at COREILLY@aimnet.org. We hope you don't have any technical issues so that you can listen to our terrific panel today. One final note, a special thank you to our sponsor, New Balance. We could not put on programs like this without the support of our sponsors, so we thank New Balance for that. So now let's get started and meet our panelists. Steve Sheinkopf is CEO of Yale Appliance, which sells, installs, repairs, and services a wide variety of household appliances. Well known across New England, Yale Appliance began in Boston and now has 3 showrooms in Eastern Massachusetts. Steve grew up in the family business and is the 3rd generation CEO with more than 35 years at the company. In addition to working his way up through operations, sales, and service, Steve has continued his grandfather's focus on the customer experience. Steve is also an active blogger. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
Kristin Maier Carlson is president of Peerless Precision, a precision machine shop in Western Massachusetts. The firm makes small, complex components with tight tolerances that are used in the aerospace and defense industries, specifically in airplane landing gear, fuel injection systems, night vision and infrared cameras, scopes, submarines, and space flights. Kristin actively seeks to get more young people and women interested in careers in manufacturing. And she is on the Commonwealth's Workforce Advisory Board and the National Tooling and Machining Association's Advanced Manufacturing Practices and Educational Development Board. Kristin also recently joined the board of AIM. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you, Kristin.
You're welcome, Kristin. And finally, we have Michael Goodman. Mike is Senior Advisor to the Chancellor for Economic Development and Strategic Initiatives and Professor of Public Policy at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. That's a really long title. Mike received his master's and PhD degrees from Boston University. He's a preeminent analyst on the Massachusetts economy and is co-editor of Mass Benchmarks, the journal of the Massachusetts economy that is published by the UMass Donahue Institute in cooperation with the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Mike also serves on the AIM Board of Economic Advisors. Welcome, Mike.
My pleasure.
Good. So thank you, panelists. Now we're going to jump right into our discussion, which is, the title of which is it only about supply chains? So that infers that there's more going on in terms of challenges that companies are facing than just supply chain issues. So to start us off, I'm going to give Mike the most difficult task, which is to set the table for us. Can you give us some background on how we got to where we are now, how and why business and our economy has changed during the pandemic, and how we got to where we are today? Not yet a new normal, but certainly a very different place than where we were in 2020. So take it away, Mike.
Well, I'll give it a shot. Thanks, Kristin. So spoiler alert, it is more than just about supply chains, but certainly supply chains are a big part of the story, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to dive a little deeper into that over the course of the next hour. I think, though, big picture, we've been through quite an interesting period, I think, using that term interesting very loosely. We had about as severe an economic recession as we've ever experienced. It was very short-lived in the spring of 2020, directly related to the pandemic response, which I think was appropriate, but really severely curtailed economic activity. It was, in essence, the equivalent of putting the economy into a state of suspended animation, or if you'll forgive a medical metaphor, medically induced coma. And so you would only want to do that under conditions where the alternatives were worse, just as you wouldn't want to take that advice from your doctor unless the alternatives were dire. And that was the situation we found ourselves in. So we had about as rapid a downturn, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of employees here in Massachusetts displaced, businesses shuttered, businesses, particularly those that are on the front lines, relying on face-to-face consumer interaction primarily suffered disproportionately. When the economy opened back up, and as the benefits of those public health interventions started to be experienced, and we made some progress, we shot out of that downturn about as rapidly as we ever have as well in the third quarter of 2020. And so that, I think, surfaced a number of different issues that have been plaguing Massachusetts in terms of our the challenges we faced to our economic growth for a long time. That includes a long-term labor supply crunch that really was cast in stark relief as a number of the employers that had been most directly affected by the pandemic struggled to get those employees to return to work because wages were rising and alternative employment options were available to them. That, of course, the uneven recovery from the pandemic globally severely put kinks into the global supply chain. We're still experiencing that today, even though much of the US is more or less normal. We can argue about whether we're post-pandemic or endemic, but things are a lot better here than they used to be. The uneven global distribution of the vaccine, different national policies, I'm thinking about China, have definitely continued to disrupt that supply chain. And I think some of the labor supply issues I mentioned have created log jams in a number of key areas. Throw into that, over the last year or so, some persistent and now, very high and troubling levels of inflation that I think, again, were connected to some of these other phenomenon. The wage increases, lots of investment at a difficult time, and certainly a huge supply shock in key commodity areas, most especially oil, exacerbated by the first land war in Europe that we've experienced in a long time. So it's been a hell of a couple of years for the Massachusetts economy, for the nation and the world. I think now we find ourselves trying to stay on course and avoid recession, even though those risks I think are rising significantly in real time. The Federal Reserve Bank in particular, which I think has the keys to the economy at this point, has made it pretty clear that they're going to raise interest rates, which historically, lead to slower growth. So it certainly looks like the rapid growth we've experienced over the past couple of years in the immediate aftermath of the worst of the pandemic is beginning to slow. And so we're at a particularly volatile and uncertain time when we're having this conversation. And I think to return to the theme, the supply chain disruptions are a huge part of the story, but by no means the whole story.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. So
Well
now,
said.
now we're going to get some information from some of our other panelists. So Steve, you source products from a variety of manufacturers domestically and across the globe. Can you talk a little bit about how your sourcing has changed and continues to change, both in terms of the countries you source from and the companies that are providing you with products?
Sure. It's funny. We talked last week, and you asked me this question. I'm like, I got off the phone. I'm like, wow, we're a totally different company in 2022 than we were in 2020. And it's little shifts and major shifts. Little shifts is like, we were a big Samsung dealer in 2020, and we don't sell any of it now, essentially because they don't have enough to put together suites for us to do. So, but instead of like, we went with LG, which is a very similar company. They're both Korean based. They're both very competitive. We may stay with LG because it's more reliable. So that's a big shift. It's not a huge shift for the consumer. Instead of Whirlpool, their brands, which is Whirlpool, KitchenAid, Gen Air, which we've been on for 10, 15 years. We're now with GE Profile, Cafe, Monogram, all that. That's GE was domestic up until about 3 years ago. Now they're owned by Haier of China, and they still do a lot of domestic manufacturing. So it's one versus the other, but we go from Whirlpool to GE, and GE I think is a better product. A lot of the sourcing we do for private label stuff, which is beverage centers and sinks and everything, we've moved a lot of that from China to Mexico, especially with hood vents, because we want to make the supply chain as short as possible and avoid the ports and these Chinese shutdowns as much as we can. But the big winner in all of this for us, or for the consumer really, is we source a lot of stuff from Turkey. And you're thinking Turkey, but Turkey's always been a major manufacturer of appliances. We never bought them per se. The Turks make all the Thermador refrigeration, all the Bosch refrigeration, all their built-in stuff. Now the big line is Beko, which got an appealing set of features, but they're the big winners in all this. You have the little micro shifts, but the Turks, if they keep it together, will have significant market share before all this is said and done.
Wow. Turkey.
Wow is right.
Yeah, who knew? Oh, thank you for that. That's
not me in 2020.
Interesting insight. Okay, so on that note, wow. Let's go to Kristin, and we'd like to learn a little bit more about your company, Kristin. So can you tell us about the products you manufacture, how the availability and the cost of the various raw materials you use, steel, aluminum, titanium, et cetera, has changed over the past 2 years?
Absolutely. So Peerless Precision is a precision machine shop. We specialize in manufacturing small, complex, generally mechanical components within tolerances from plus or minus 10 thousandths of an inch down to plus or minus 5 millionths of an inch. For those who don't know what that looks like, you can't see it with the naked eye. It's like taking one of your hairs and splitting it down the middle 1,000 different times. And we're able to do that here. A lot of the industries we serve, aerospace, where we make components for engines, fuel injection systems, landing gear, and hydraulics, defense. We are one of 3 critical component suppliers in New England for the manufacture of the cryogenic cooling systems for thermal imaging, night vision, and infrared cameras. When they found the Boston Marathon bomber underneath the tarp in the boat in 2013, parts that were made at my shop in Westfield, Massachusetts were actually in that camera running the cryogenic systems. We also do work for indirectly for the Navy on their smart missile systems. We support the Air Force on repair work or replacement components for them, as well as producing prosthetic components for the medical industry, and also making parts that go into giant microscopes, 3D measuring systems, and most recently this year we got into manned space flight. So we have delivered a few parts down to Alabama that are going to be going up into space within the next few years. So generally what we manufacture our parts out of are steel, aluminum, titanium, tungsten, some plastics. We get into exotic materials like Inconel and Kovar as well. A lot of those, especially steel, aluminum, titanium, used to be very reliable in the price that we were paying and how long it would take to get to us. We used to enjoy a 1 to 3 day lead time, as early going back to 2020 and before, even when the tariffs got enacted during the Trump administration. Now those 1 to 3 day lead times have turned into 1 to 4 weeks, up to 6 months. So, and the raw stock market right now, raw material market right now, quotes and lead times are only guaranteed for 1 to 5 days, where they used to be guaranteed for 30 days. So when we issue a quote to our customer and we give them a lead time, and they don't, send a quote for a month, by the time we get that, we place the material order, the material has grown in price, has increased in price, and the lead time has probably doubled. So it's lead time's been a big thing. The cost factor has been huge. We've seen anywhere from 100 to 1,000% increase in pricing on the raw material that we buy. For an example, prior to 2020, we could get an 1/8 inch diameter, 12-foot bar of a certain grade of steel for $18. An 1/8 inch is tiny. Now that same bar of material is costing me over $400.
Yikes.
Yep.
Okay, so thank you for that. Mike, can you comment, is this what you're hearing or seeing, these kinds of supply chain stories from other companies across Massachusetts, or is it a little different?
You're muted, Mike.
Sorry about that. I think I pick up on a couple of themes that I think resonate with me. One is Steve's point that he's looking for a more diverse array of suppliers that are physically closer to his location. So from Asia to Mexico, for example, right? So, and I think that's happening. Certainly as a consumer, and I'm sure many of those participating and listening here today can identify, I've run into these things, right? I'm in the market for a new car, so I find my used car worth remarkably more than I would have ever imagined, but I can't believe what the sticker shock, if you can get one on a new car, is. And I think a lot of that is due to critical shortages in the supply chain gaps around some piece of technology that we just don't manufacture here. So one takeaway is that I think there is some close examination that's going on about reshoring. For example, I didn't realize we only had one major manufacturer of infant formula in the United States, and laws that prevented us from importing it or made it very difficult, for example, or a handful of meat packing plants. So I think there are a lot of firms that had gotten really, really good at the just-in-time sourcing and keeping inventories low and maximizing the ROI on those sorts of choices that are really starting to recognize that the risks of that supply chain disruption have real financial present really financial challenges. On the pricing side, I mean, I think we're just going to have to ride out those steel prices. I think it doesn't seem very likely that we're going to stand up the steel industry fast enough for it to make a difference. Unfortunately, my sense, Kristin, from your description is that you have some customers that are maybe a little bit more price insensitive, so you can pass along those prices. I think for many of our firms, they're really in a jam where their costs are rising in real time, and even though retail prices are rising, the power to raise them to cover all of the increase in your costs, I don't think it's quite there yet.
Well, and I'm glad you pointed that out, Mike, because the reality is, AIM has over 3,000 companies as members, and we tend to have companies on both sides of a lot of major issues. And so, we obviously, it's important to listen to both sides, and there's no easy answers for any of these things. So we'll be talking a little bit more later about it.
I do think the domestic manufacturing is going to ultimately, with a little bit of a lag, get a boost out of this.
Mm-hmm. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we get into the discussion today. So some of what you mentioned, Mike, brings me to my next point, which is about relationships. And I've talked with each of you about this, the importance and the value of building and maintaining relationships before you need them. And so to that point, Steve, you're in a business, for instance, where your customers want what they want, they need what they need right now, the dishwasher broke, or they need a new refrigerator. And I'm talking about your consumer customers. I know you have corporate customers as well, or they want a particular brand. So can you talk about how you manage your customers' expectations, or how you help them understand options that may be different than what they had when they started the process?
Good question. First of all, there's certain brands that in 2019 we could deliver them on to you. Now, those brands are 8 months to a year and a half out. So the first thing we always tell people is, instead of waiting 2 months to order your appliances, order them at the beginning of your project. I think a lot of this is transparency and communication. The truth of the matter is you can get anything you want if you want to wait long enough to get it. And that's the message. However, that said, if you need it right now, really right now, there's nobody in this country that can supply a Mueller or Bosch dishwasher. Those are the two best brands. It's not going to happen. There are none. There's none. So really, you have to say, okay, you can wait 6 months for it, or why are you buying it, right? If it's because you're quiet or you want to put a panel on or something, here are some options. And, you know, we publish reliability ratings and features and all that stuff on our blog of saying, if it's quiet that you want, here are 3 quiet dishwashers that you can buy. You know, what we try to do is, okay, you want what you want, that's great. Can you wait for it? The answer is no. Here are some reasonable solutions to the brands you want. And in the beginning, I said the Turks are going to be big market share gainers. But I think the way that we buy appliances in 3 to 5 years is going to be very different. I think a lot of the established brands are going to have real problems, specifically a Mueller or Bosch or something, with some of these brands like, you know, LG or Profile or Beko that make very good products that are less expensive with features that people seem to want. You know, so get to drill down to what people want, be transparent about what they can get, and offer them solutions if they need it right now. It's the only way you're going to do it.
I like that you mentioned transparency with customers because we've heard that a lot, that seems to make a difference. So Kristin, can you talk a little bit? I know you mentioned earlier how you're reworking your contracts and working directly with your customers, and that's a pretty successful collaborative approach. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I mean, Steve actually hit it right on the nose. It's all about communication and transparency. In manufacturing, especially when you deal with the DoD, whether directly or indirectly, aerospace companies, it's all about cost reduction, which is usually maintaining the price as long as we possibly can. So, you know, if we were to go back 2 or 3 years, if I had to raise a price, they would be all over me saying, we need to, you know, what are all these costs? Where's this coming from? We can always control, you know, the time it takes to manufacture something in-house. We do revisit our, you know, our hourly rate to, you know, make sure we're not losing money. And it's gone up quite a bit this year with inflation and, you know, electricity and gas going up and the cost of gas. And but it's really they're a lot more receptive to it now because everyone's aware of the situation that we're all in. Where right now, I mean, on our quotes that we send out, I've actually put in verbiage that says specifically due to the volatility of the raw material market, pricing and lead time is subject to change at time of order. And we haven't seen any kickback from that. If we send a quote to a customer and we were, let's say the price doesn't change, but the lead time we were given to order the raw material was 2 weeks. And then they placed the order a month later, and all of a sudden that lead time has gone to 3 months because the mill is out of stock. All of our suppliers are out of stock. All we do is get back to them immediately as soon as we find out and say, this is the lead time we're looking at right now. You know, do you still want to place the order with us? You know, well, we're hoping that the material will come in sooner, but right now this is the best date we can commit to. And they're very responsive to it.
Good. Okay, that's a success story. All right, let's move on now to inflation. Mike, you talked about this a little bit earlier, and I believe you said you think we've been in an inflationary situation for close to a year. I kind of lost track, but that's what it looks like. So how are companies experiencing this, and how might they manage the inflationary pressures that they're facing?
Yeah, I mean, I think for many of our firms and certainly our households, particularly lower and moderate income households, it's extremely painful, right? So although it certainly creates opportunities for certain firms that may have products or inventory that was purchased at one price and now can be sold at another, I think for most, replenishing those inventories is becoming very expensive, and passing the price along to the customer can be done, but not always fast enough in real time. I think it'd be harder in sort of a customer facing or a retail environment to kind of change the price at the point of sale, like it may be possible to do in defense contracting. I mean, we've seen firms, certainly this is visible in the data, I wouldn't say, I don't know whether hoarding is appropriate, but certainly making much larger inventory accumulation choices than they normally would. That's pretty rational. I suspect, Steve, when you see those world's greatest dishwashers again available, you may acquire a few more of them than you might have prior to this experience. It also, of course, that's right, if when you can get them. And of course, wages are rising as well in this environment, and that puts cost pressure on businesses at the same time. And so I think we're just getting started, but in a rising price, slowing growth environment, it is painful.
Well, let's go to you, Steve, since Mike called you out on this. So what are you seeing? And you mentioned earlier your business is different now than it was in 2020. So what's going on with significant increases that you're seeing in pricing for household appliances? And how are you managing through that with your customers? There's demand and your supply. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I'm really surprised that the inflation is only 8% because I'm pretty sure that appliances are somewhere north of 15 and maybe under 35. And if we take a look at appliances from like 1986 to 2016 before the tariffs, the price of commodity appliances didn't change. You know, the $3.99 washer when I started in 1986 was $4.49 in 2016. So a lot of it is, you know, it's probably opportunistic for them to be able to do what they're doing. You know, there's certainly a lot of price pressure. You know, Kristin talks about steel. You know, we talk about factories. You know, factories now have to do the COVID 6-foot. So they had to reformat factories, is what the Bosch people were saying. Then there's the old supply versus demand, and the increase of components. You know, you talk about warehousing. Warehousing has gone up 3 times in 10 years for leasing a warehouse. Buying a warehouse, it's probably more than that. It's probably 4 times. So all these factors together, when added, you know, everyone talks about supply chain issue. I think of it's like a bowl of, you know, like a ball of yarn. You know, there's not just one issue. There's like 12. You know, between ports, ships, trucks, steel, gas, electricity, warehouse. Pick one, right? Because all of them have gone up exponentially. And all that has been reflected in appliances, probably more so than anything else. I mean, I did a presentation to Harvard, and I said, following the, I had a slide, I said, following the companies that didn't raise prices twice in 2020 to 2022, and it was blank, you know, kind of odd humor. But from what I see, appliances are probably somewhat responsible for the 8, maybe more. You know, again, that is if you can get them. So,
Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to let this go by. I mean, Steve mentioned, I think, a factor that is something that is directly under our control here in the U.S., and that is the tariffs on Chinese imports, which I'm sure hit his business as hard as any. And so those have the effect of directly increasing the costs to the wholesaler and the retailer and ultimately the end user. And so there aren't too many things that can be done to relieve pressure, but finally putting the tariff policies in the rearview mirror would be a nice step in the right direction.
See, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think the way out is investment in this country, right? I mean, and I think growing the businesses where she can make components and compressors are made in the U.S. instead of Brazil and LG. I think it makes things a lot better. The problem with tariffs is if you use it for direct investment in things you need, they work. If they go to some ether somewhere, you know, to some pork project somewhere, they don't work. So yeah. Although it hurts me more than probably any industry, I'm for, you know, we look at why we lost control. It's outsourcing, where, you know, if you outsource everything, you know, and that one component that you need is outsourced, you know, it's like a rep said, you can't ship a dishwasher, you need 24 parts, you get 19, right? Same thing with cars, same thing with everything else. So I'm in favor of the tariffs as long as they're applied back in investment into this country.
Yeah, well, we can agree to disagree. I mean, I think there are opportunities reshoring for sure. But I think if we think about just the labor crunch, I'm sure that you're facing just to get people on the floor, imagining standing up or reestablishing giant manufacturing capacity in the country. We have a labor and some other major obstacles. But you're right, that could be overcome with a massive investment. But it does appear to be forthcoming.
Labor is a separate topic.
And we're getting there. We're getting there. We're getting there. Okay, Chris, I'm going to go to you about the increased prices for steel that was mentioned earlier. So can you talk a little bit about how you're managing through that?
Yeah, again, it's just about coming back to our customer and being open and honest with what we're looking at. It's for a long time prior to this 1 to 2, 3 year period, it was being an advanced manufacturer with the industries that we serve. Quality is always assumed. It's always about best price and best lead time. Now, sometimes the lead time outweighs the lowest cost. Especially everyone's, when you're talking about airplanes, when you're talking about whether it's commercial or for defense related, they have timelines. If we're the last one they're waiting for parts on, we're the ones who are in trouble. You never want to be the last one to ship. So if we're ordering material and we're faced with 2 different quotes, one is a lower cost, but it's got a 6-month lead time. And then we've got another one that, let's say, is maybe twice as much as the longer lead time, but it'll take half the time to get to us. We'll present that to our customer and let them tell us which route they would like to take. Can you wait 6 months to keep the price as it is, or do you need it in the delivery time you set to us? We're still going to have to extend it by a month because 3 months is just too long. And if they give us the approval to go with the higher cost, and we've been seeing customers lead more that way nowadays. I mean, I hear from, my big customer that we make the parts for the cryogenic systems in. They slowed down substantially at the beginning of this year because they were waiting on other components, and they weren't pulling from us because they're waiting on other components, whether they're coming from overseas or other manufacturers in the US. If they're waiting for computer chips, semiconductors, they're not going to keep pulling the parts that we have ready for them until they start going through their inventory and building more. So it's, our customers have an option. You can get it for the price you want, or you can get it in the time frame you want. It doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it's just a long lead time, no matter the way you look at it. I was ordering some tool steel a few months ago that we get all the time, and normally we could get it in 2 to 3 days, and we got a 10-week lead time, a 12-week lead time, and a 20-week lead time. And these are for the cryogenic systems. It's a very contract going right to the DoD, and the 10-week lead time was twice the cost of the 20-week from a new supplier. And I reached out to him. I said, okay, I can do it in this time frame, but we're going to have to, increase the cost. And they, adjusted the, purchase order and gave me the thumbs up to go ahead because they can't wait.
Wow. Okay. Well, several of you've mentioned labor issues. So let's get into that right now. Steve, you've said in prior conversations that I've had with you that one of your biggest challenges is hiring the right talent for your open jobs. And I think you also mentioned you have particular needs for skilled labor, service technicians, plumbing, electricians, as well as delivery people. So how are you addressing these labor challenges?
Not well, but
okay.
You're all for honesty. We're all for transparency, but let's flash back, right? Somehow everybody, the whole notion that everybody needs to go to a 4-year school instead of a trade school, it's lost on me. Why? I mean, again, I said this before, average doctor, average lawyer, average service tech, who makes the most? Average service tech. And he or she doesn't have to pay for training, right? No debt, benefits day one, right? We've kind of lost our way with trade schools and everything else in this country. That would be an actionable item. But what we've done is we've taken the recruiting in-house. We have 2 recruiters just for this type of labor, right? And so what we do is I was with the service department today. We got a skilled mason who wants to be an appliance service technician. So part of the onboarding process is a 4-month intensive program on how to fix an appliance, because there aren't any skilled appliance. The average age of an appliance service technician in 2003 was 53 years old. That was 20 years ago, right? So what you have to do is take somebody with some skills and turn them into what you need them to, because the people, from what I can see, don't exist, right? You're not getting appliance service technicians. The one appliance service technician school went out of business like 8 years ago, right, in Canton, Massachusetts. So really, it's a process of recruiting raw talent and basically molding them into what you need. And that's basically, that is priority number one for us. You know, we have 34 technicians. We need 50, whether we go in recession or not.
Yeah. Yep. Kristin, can you talk a little bit about your involvement in getting more young people involved in manufacturing, people who might not have considered manufacturing careers? And I know what Steve just said about four-year colleges and two-year colleges, vocational schools, that he's singing out of the same songbook you are. So you might want to comment on
The appliance industry and manufacturing could be the same one, because the average, I mean, I'm sure everyone knows the average age of most machinist manufacturers are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, sometimes 70s. Well, I did attend UMass Dartmouth. I will admit on here to everyone, I dropped out my third year because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I went because I was told you have to go to college, otherwise, and this is coming from my father, who owned a manufacturing company, who no daughter of mine's going to a trade school, you know? So I found out later in life that I learned better by doing. I will never shoot down anyone who wants to pursue a 4-year degree or more, as long as they know what they want to do and they know they're going to be able to use it, because it's Steve's absolutely right. Trades have gotten, it's not a new bad reputation, but we've been given a bad reputation for decades, and it takes longer to get out of that than in it. So when I started running Peerless Precision, I just turned 30. So one of the youngest owners in the region, probably in the industry. I'll be 40 in October, so it's been about 10 years. And at that time, you know, I was not too far removed from younger people in age. Now, when I say I'm not too much older than you, I catch myself and I say, oh yeah, I graduated high school before you were born, so I can't say that anymore. But it's been, you know, I want younger people, or even adults, to know the opportunities that are out there and that there are different paths. It helps, especially young women, to see someone who looks like them in this industry, because you need to be able to see yourself in something that might be considered non-traditional in order to want to pursue it. And up until, you know, about 10, 15 years ago, it was, if you think about someone who's a machinist, it was, you know, my dad or my grandfather or something like that. And I don't want my kid working in, you know, a dark, dirty, dingy machine shop. So it's about changing the narrative, bringing in kids for tours. I mean, we have elementary students coming here to see what manufacturing is. I will go to schools and I will talk with them, bring parts, let them ask me all the questions. I talk at their level so they understand it, try to add a little humor in there and show them how awesome it is to be able to make things that are used, you know, on airplanes or for the defense, you know, defense of our country, flying into space. And you have to take pride in what you do. And someone like me and my employees need to show how proud they are of contributing and making things that they know are either going to make a difference or help a plane fly successfully. In Westfield, we've got a program called the Westfield Education to Business Alliance, called WeTuba, and it's a marriage between the Chamber of Commerce and the school system, where companies in Westfield adopt classrooms. So I adopted a 5th and 6th grade math class in the local intermediate school. And I go in there twice a year, because the teacher, Matt, chose to have me address the girls only and then separately the boys, because my message to the young girls is different, because they need that boost to be in what is very much male dominated in my industry. So I go and I bring parts in, I kind of teach a class and show them how, like you guys, I'm sure, everyone in here doesn't think you're going to need to use math when you grow up. I was like you, but guess what? This is the math that we use in manufacturing. This is what you need to know. You need to be able to, balance a checkbook, even though no one knows what a checkbook is anymore. And then a week later, whatever group I have taught the prior week, they come in for a tour. So they actually get to talk to the people on the floor. I like to, guide them towards the younger folks, 30 and under, sometimes in their early 30s that have either gone through a trade school, come to us on an internship from our Springfield Technical Community College, or chose to change their career path later in life. Because you're never too old to change your career path. And just because you decided you wanted to do something when you graduated high school doesn't mean that's the same thing you wanted to do by the time you turned 30.
And what Steve said, which is, take somebody with some raw talent who already has some skills and turn them into something else that they want to do.
A lot of times I look more nowadays, I mean, I guess I say this jokingly, but luckily for manufacturing, the workforce shortage and issues is nothing new to us. We've been dealing with it for decades, and it's not going to get any better because our population is shrinking. And you can blame that. I am a very old millennial, and you can blame that on my generation because we're not reproducing like the generations were before us. So, and I'm part of that problem because I have 0 kids, because I have 24 children here that the majority of them are older than I am. I'm on my local vocational schools advisory board for manufacturing. I'm the chair of the state's workforce training fund advisory board, and at a national level, I'm leading workforce development with the National Tooling and Machining Association. So the more of us that are involved in trying to change, make a difference and change the view of trades, the view of manufacturing, give them let everyone know that, yeah, you can go to a 4-year college, but it's okay if you're not meant to do that, because not everyone's cut out for it. Let me bring you into Peerless. Let me put you through my pre-apprenticeship program, train you. And then if you really wanted to pursue a degree or go to school for more manufacturing or engineering, guess who's going to pay for your degree? As long as you stay working for me.
Yeah. And I know you have success stories there, Kristin, because you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago.
We have a lot of we're kind of a diamond in the rough. We have a lot of folks on our floor that are under 40. We have a lot of 19, 20, and 30-year-olds. So and that's been my goal for the past decade, is to not experience the retirement cliff, and bring younger folks in so they can learn from the experienced guys before they run away from me for the rest of their lives.
You've kind of got a magic formula that I'm sure there's a number of people on this webinar who would be interested in learning more about that. So more to come, maybe in a separate webinar that we can address that. Okay, I'm going to swing back a little bit to something that we've talked about a little bit, which is the reshoring, the nearshoring, and just today, this morning, I read about friendshoring, which is something that Janet Yellen talked about recently. Friendshoring being doing more with our allies, countries with similar values that to the US's, as opposed to more authoritarian regimes. I'd not heard the term friendshoring until earlier today. But getting to the conversation that we touched on a little bit earlier, there is a lot of talk about reshoring, and Steve, you just talked about that, of doing more with Mexico as opposed to Asia. Kristin, in particular, are you finding that there are opportunities that have come to you in the last year or so as companies are looking more domestically as opposed to internationally to finding new suppliers?
Absolutely. When the global supply chain shut down with the pandemic, the first thing I thought was, there's a silver lining here, because this could mean a lot for American manufacturers. So we've been seeing a huge increase in the amount of quotes that our requests for quotes we're receiving from new industries, from new customers that had previously had components or parts manufactured overseas, and now they can't get anything they can't get their parts delivered, so they're looking to have them done here, which is good news for us. And we've been through where our customers offshored to Asia, hoping the work would come back to us. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. And just, manufacturing, again, for years has been going more and more overseas, and it needs to come back here. It's just like Steve said earlier, we need to support our American manufacturing base. We need to do more here. It will help us control a lot of these factors that are out of our control. I mean, we can't control everything, but the second that the world shuts down is potentially good news for American manufacturing.
Mike, you want to comment on that? I know
Yeah.
that there's some, can this be done on a large scale?
I think the death of the global economy is greatly exaggerated, right? I think we're going through a very big crisis here, and I think there is a lot more that we can do at home or nearby with our close trading partners and friends or in countries that share our values. But I do think we have, and this sort of harkens back to the labor question, a serious challenge. And so I'm in higher ed, but I don't get paid on commission. So I don't know that the problem is there's too many college students. I do think we've had a challenge attracting students into manufacturing and into career paths that don't necessarily require an advanced degree, for example. But when I think about the experience of the previous generations, the parents who were advising people of my generation, those were people who were displaced from manufacturing during deindustrialization some time ago. Steve, when you were talking about the appliance repairman, I was thinking back to the Maytag commercials in which the image of the appliance repairman was the loneliest guy in the building. So I think shifting on a dime is going to be very difficult. I think in particular, areas that are vital to national security, national defense, the national public health, and other kind of critical sources of supply, baby formula, food, those things seem to me to be imperatives for growth. But we're not quite shrinking in population yet, as Kristin mentioned, but the birth rate in Massachusetts was lower than the death rate last year, and there's an inevitability to that. And so if we aspire to scaling manufacturing in response to this crisis, I think we're going to need policies that are going to make it easier for people to have families, and they're going to make it easier for those who would be inclined to move here from elsewhere to do that. And so in this environment, we talked about the tariffs earlier, but the tariffs and the immigration restrictions, I think, are hugely counterproductive.
Okay. I'm sensitive to the time here, and I want to make sure we're not missing any questions. So I don't know if any questions have come in. I've got a few people behind the scenes checking that out.
And while you're doing that, Kristin, if you want to finish your degree, it's never too late. And your friends at UMass Dartmouth will do whatever we can to help make that possible.
I've thought about it quite frequently. It kind of makes me a little nervous because I've been out of school for going on 20 years. But I might take you up on that.
Pick up a call. I don't know what we can do, but we'll do everything we can.
Yeah, I'm always joking because I consult with MIT on some automation stuff they're working on in a lot of different schools, UMass, Amherst, and I'm always like, anyone who wants to give me that honorary degree, like I've got a big space on my wall for it.
Well, that's a longer conversation, but if you've earned one, it makes it much easier.
Yeah, maybe we'll chat further about it.
We'll take this offline. So we do have a question about inventory, and I know we touched on this a little bit earlier. So some companies are carrying more inventory. Some people call it padding inventory. Some people may call it hoarding, whatever you want to call it. And in some cases, probably it does make some good business sense. And yet you hear that there can be a downside to that. So Steve, I know you mentioned something to me that you said you're carrying more inventory, but fewer selections, I think is how you described it. So can you talk about your inventory levels this year versus in previous years?
No, we can talk about it from last year even. Our inventory is up from 19 to $31 million. Now, some of it is because we've had sales growth that supports that, but I'm in an industry so broken that even some of the big vendors that you wouldn't think this would happen, says, you know, the truck's pulling up, do you want it or not? And the answer is yes, we do want it, so we bring it in, right? A lot of the things is that local sources have dried up. And inventory in this world is a competitive advantage, right? It's a competitive advantage. And unfortunately, because there's a lack of inventory, let's take a look at the average person orders a kitchen of appliances from us. If we have 4 out of the 5 items, they want 1 delivery. So we're holding on a lot of what factory people call work in process, where we have more inventory held for people than we really should, because we're still missing that piece. So there's a lot of reasons why we're holding a lot more inventory, but I'm not a public company, so I don't need Wall Street looking at my balance sheet. It's none of their business because we're private. So we look at having more inventory as an advantage, not as a disadvantage the way public companies do.
Okay, so now I'm going to go to Kristin, because Kristin has a completely different, for good reason, for good business reasons. So to your point, for you, this is a competitive advantage. Kristin, tell us about what you do in terms of the inventory that you manage.
Yeah, so I don't buy raw material or hardware just to have it in hopes that or anticipating that I won't be able to get it down the line. We are what is considered a high mix, low volume manufacturer. So we make thousands of different part numbers in all the different shapes and sizes and configurations every year, different materials. Low volume is we do prototyping for production. So we'll make 1, 5, 10 pieces. We'll make, a few hundred into the low thousands. If I were to go and try and anticipate to buy a year's worth of, let's say, that 01 tool steel that I had a 20-week lead time, or whatever it was, I might not be getting an order for that. I might not be using it, or especially with metals, there are specifications that we have to buy to, being an aerospace and defense manufacturer. With aerospace, it's going to be the aerospace material specifications. Military, there's military standards. And every time someone at these specifying organizations talks about a specification, the revision changes. When that revision changes, I have 18 months from the date that revision changes to be able to use the material before I can't use it anymore. So I could order material. I could say, let's say I order $100,000 worth of a certain diameter of stainless steel. By the end of the year, I might have just wasted $100,000 on material because I can't use it anymore because the specifications are out. So it's not in my best interest. Some other manufacturers it is. You hear about that a lot, which is making it more difficult for companies of my size to get these raw materials, because you've got the big guys who are either putting in contracts, long-term agreements, or buying up all the inventory for either themselves or their suppliers, and then we're kind of left in the dark waiting to see if we can get it or not.
Thank you. As a reminder, if anybody listening has questions, you can just type those into the chat or the question panel on your screen. We have another question that came in related to what we've been talking about, which is supply and demand. So we hear different things in the media these days that in some ways maybe demand is softening for some industries. What is your sense, and I'll ask everybody on the panel this, of when we might reach some sort of equilibrium in terms of supply and demand? Now, we don't know, we're forecasting the future, but I think this is a good question of when might we see this? So who wants to take that first?
I suppose it's an occupational hazard for me I think now the trajectory and the timing is probably in the hands of the Federal Reserve Board as much as anyone, right? The tools in the policymakers' toolkit economically are really designed to manage demand. And so when you have inflation at the levels we're experiencing, is at least at this point caused by supply-related issues and maybe reinforced by wages. It's still too early to tell. The Fed is going to do what it said it's going to do. They're going to raise rates, which is going to have, through a number of channels, an effect on reducing demand. So either the supply stuff will work itself out, right? The oil shock will pass, so the refining capacity will increase, will moderate energy prices, and maybe we'll get that soft landing that Chairman Powell is talking about. If not, they're going to reduce demand through monetary policy until it comes into equilibrium. So I would say, I think, inflation certainly through the end of this year, and they're going to be taking actions all along the way that's going to reduce demand. I think likely through 2023 as well. And the real wild card is whether or not those efforts to reduce demand will, as they have, I think, every time since World War II, push us into a negative growth state, at least temporarily. I think we might be able to pull it off this time, but I think equilibrium is sort of in the next 18 months or so.
Steve, over to you on that, because you and I talked about this a little bit, actually. How long you think your backlog is going to last, and demand is going to eventually get back to whatever a new normal might be?
Well, first of all, inflation certainly plays a role, but interest rates play a role in our industry.
Mm-hmm.
Again, so you can't buy a house, you will remodel the house you have.
It's the brake
If you
pedal.
take a look at if you take a look at the numbers that we have, we're down about 3.5%. Okay, which is not tragic, seeing that last year was by far a record year. So really, the way I equate it is like you get this steam train, you get this locomotive that is out of control. Right? It's on the tracks going 100 miles an hour. Even if you do the right things, right? Whether it's fed or this or that, or karma, soft landing, whatever you call it, takes a long time to slow that train down to a manageable point. I don't think we're there yet. And I think this, we talk about supply chain like it's one singular item. It's really 12 to 15 different things that are problematic that need to be addressed by investment, either privately, like Kristin and I have done by trying to get people, or publicly by saying, we're going to subsidize components or labor or whatever it is. But I just don't. I don't see this. I don't see this ending well, and I don't see it ending till mid to late 2024.
2024.
2024.
Okay. Kristin?
I'm in a different bit of a ballgame than everyone else with not dealing with public, the public and the consumers and everything, because all of our supply and demand is directly related to, commercial aerospace, which definitely took a nosedive with 2020. We weren't one of the manufacturers who had been gearing up for the ramp ups they had been talking about, especially from Boeing prior to the pandemic, and getting ready to, make record numbers. So we weren't affected too bad. But, we're looking at, at least commercial aerospace, the orders getting back to where they were supposed to be 2-3 years ago, and starting the beginning of 2024. Defense wise, it all depends on who's in the administration, who we're fighting with all over the world at the time. It's right now, I hate to say it, but I'm waiting for us to, anticipating for us to have a more involved response in what's going on in Ukraine. While I don't support that, war efforts, it's for business, so I can't really make predictions. I mean, I'd say probably like, 2023, 2024. I don't think it's definitely not going to be this year, because it takes a lot longer to dig ourselves out of this than it took to get into it.
Okay, well, we're about out of time here. Mike, I'm going to give you the last note here in the last minute of our conversation. So we're hearing 2024 from Steve, 2024 from Kristin. And end this on a high note, please.
Yeah, I think none of us really know. There's so many uncertainties, the geopolitical uncertainties, the economic and the financial uncertainties. It's an election year. The policy choices that are made, not just here, but around the world, are really going to matter. I think our policymakers have to, and I'll build on Steve's transportation metaphor. I think this is like, who was the pilot who landed on the Hudson? Was it Sully Sullenberger?
Sully Sullivan.
Right. I mean, so I think the task there is very similar. They have to land on not so solid ground and not sink. And it can be done, but it's going to be very difficult. I think there's so many, matters that are out of our control. It's tough to tell, but I'm cautiously optimistic that that things will not get appreciably worse, and if we experience a recession, that it'll be a modest one. A lot of this is I think not surprising given the volatility that we've had related to the pandemic, and there's trillions and trillions of dollars and millions of people whose decisions are going to have a role in the outcome. And so I think we're going to have to just hang in there. We'll get through this.
I like that, hang in there. Okay. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your thoughts and your insights with us today. Thanks to all of you who joined us. Thanks to New Balance, who's our sponsor. And finally, please contact AIM if you have any questions, if there's any way we can help your company with anything that you need. And keep an eye on our website because we do have a couple events coming up over the course of the summer that might be of interest to you. So thank you all and enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Bye.